Welcome back to another episode of the Technically Human podcast. I'm joined today with guest Mark Vincent. Welcome, Mark.
This is a pleasure.
So, before we dive in and get started, I wanted to give you an opportunity, Mark, to just give some insight and background as to who you are, and then we'll go ahead and start the conversation.
It's a funny thing, isn't it, to say this is who I am, and then maybe people are checking their notes against you as they search on the web. Is this real? And are they making it up or whatever else? So what I've just become familiar with saying, and I think it's really pretty accurate, is that I'm a group process guy, an organizational development guy within groups that have to process things and figure things out. And I started working at this when I was in graduate school. And this was a time that social science was really starting to look at this a little bit more because the way that industry made decisions was that the boss told you what to do. And if you were in human services or some kind of a religious organization or an association of some kind, you used likely Robert's Rules of Order to make decisions or parliamentary procedure. And so to say, hey, we're going to be a team, or we're going to brainstorm, or we're going to look for a win-win scenario, or we're going to workshop this, that was all new phrases when I was starting. And because I was doing graduate work in this area and trying to work at methodologies, people heard about it. Their old ways or their former ways weren't working. I got invited, will you come help us? These methods do work. That's why they've taken off. And as a result, I would get invited to larger projects, more complex ones, international ones, and the methods worked. A career was born, and over time, it became apparent that we needed a home for this level of expertise, and there wasn't anything that really existed. So in 2000, we created Design Group International as really what I believe we can accurately say was the first community of practice around process consulting, using some of Edgar Schein's methodologies, but putting it into a professional setting. Grew that up, chaired the partnership for 5 years after I stepped up out of the CEO role, sold my stake in that business a couple of years ago so I could get into private practice. That lets me no longer think about running an organization or whatever, walk beside people who have to think about running an organization. And all throughout those years, I did a lot of succession planning and continuity planning with business owners, nonprofits, some associational systems, some sporting groups that had succession to work through and were taking a process approach. Now, I've done it with many types of fields. I've lived it myself. And it was like, I can get to the spot where that's what I do, that I sit with those leaders in those moments where everything could fall apart. Everything they worked for all of their lives could fall apart. So that's my background. That's what I get to do. And if people are interested in the personal part of me, I am a husband. I have 6 kids. We are a second marriage. We were both widowed. And it's a kind of a tender story. We were all in college together, and after our spouses had died and we'd raised our kids, all but one, we found love. And our families invited us, actually nudged us. We think you ought to make something like this happen. And so we've now been married 10 years and they're all spread out. So we circulate. Our suitcases are almost always packed, and we'll be a couple of weeks in one place, a couple of months in another. And we maintain some small residences in Boise, Idaho, and St. Louis, Missouri, but I'm often on the road.
Nice. Thank you so much. Wrote down some notes. I have a couple questions to get us started.
Okay.
One of the things that you said, and even that I found when I was looking up some more insight on you, was people in organizations shouldn't be just told what to do. And just a little story from when I was in corporate life. I had a new employee come into my team and sat down with him. We were doing a lot of project management type of work. And he sits down and I said, we've had this project now for a couple weeks being new on the team. What are we going to do from here? And how can I support you? And he looks at me and he goes, oh, I'm just waiting for you to tell me what to do.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, that's not how this works. And he said, that's what my last manager did in this kind of work. And so I went and had the conversation with that manager and I said, what? This isn't how we should be operating. And he said, it was just easier to tell my people what to do versus them taking off with it. So just
Wow.
insight from you on what you've seen with different organizations or leaders that you've walked into and how do we make sure people have this shift And instead of just telling
Yeah.
people what to do, that they are getting their feedback and their insight.
I don't want to just rush at the answer for this because that's important. And it is the way management was done for a long time. And it usually assumed that the person managing the situation, which is different in this case than leading it, is that they had the sum of knowledge. And so they were like the guru at the top of the mountain that you ascend to, and they tell you what to do. Or there's that old joke, when I tell you to jump, you ask me how high, kind of thing. And that is how it has been done and is still done in many places, but it's limited then to what that leader knows and has mastered. And you can show all kinds of evidence. That means there's a lot of things they don't know and have not mastered that they actually become an obstacle to the growth of the business and the growth of their people. So it's a serious question. And I found, as you told me that story, my heart broke a little bit more for the second part of it than even the first part. In the first part, you got an employee, tell me what to do and I'll do it. Now, what you run into is then they don't probably own it. They're not going to necessarily initiate from here. This now reinforces that you will take their problems. They can come and bring their stuff, dump it on your desk, and you're going to take care of it. And they're going to sit in suspension until you tell them what to do next. So you're not going to get a whole lot of productivity increases or insights or improvements or efficiencies or anything out of their work. But that second part, where there's someone who is in a leadership role, has some leadership aspects to their role, can be developing others, holding up accountability and all that, who is becoming an obstacle to that learning, is actually reinforcing those submissive kind of neural pathways in the people who work for them and is causing more harm to the business across more relationships than a frontline worker who's saying, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. So the problem has a larger complication at the level of a manager who agrees that I don't want to put up with the difficulty and the pressures of growing somebody, and I don't want to waste time having to tell them to do something a second time or whatever. So I'm just going to do it. It's just easier if I do it. Now, the capacity of their department is their capacity. It's not the capacity of the total, it's the capacity of that person. And they just put a limiting factor in that affects the whole rest of the business. So the address of that, I think, is to address it at that level. That it becomes a conversation not with that frontline worker, hey, come on now, you guys show initiative. It's sitting down with that leader and saying, you're not leading and you're quashing initiative. And if somebody doesn't have it, then we've got to get them in the right seat because they're not the right person in the right seat. And if you don't adjust this, you're not the right person in the right seat. And that's difficult because now
Yeah.
you're aware of it. And so then the responsibility rises, if you're the supervisor, rises to you. If you're not addressing it at the level underneath you, then it's not going to get addressed further down.
And it can be challenging too. I guess the extra layer of difficulty in this situation is I had been in my role for maybe a year or so,
Yeah,
and this other person had been, what,
long
15,
time.
20 years?
Yeah,
And so then it becomes, do you really challenge that or do you kind of
yep.
drop it? And what authority do you have? But when you were talking about with the person pushing it back, I also see it, they're releasing that accountability on you. And
Hmm.
it's not my fault that this happened. This isn't your kind of thing.
Yeah, you end up, if you take it, if you accept what they're handing you, now it is
Mhm.
yours. And the story you told here is the fruit of not being, I'm quoting Brene Brown here, but not being clear and kind from the get-go.
Yeah.
So it very quickly becomes far more expensive later to try and address it. There's a way of talking about this sometimes where we call these expensive sentences. A gentleman named Jack Quarles has written about this extensively. So the idea that to say, oh, I'll just do it myself. That is an expensive sentence. It's costing the business time and money. It's costing you personally for your own achievements, your own sense of productivity, your own well-being in the
Yeah.
long run. So we're at the front end, we can address it. Back end, and it's built up. It is painful. But then we're choosing what pain are we going to live with? We're going to live with the pain of the frustrations of people not doing their jobs until they're told and having these obstacles, or we're going to live with the pain of rooting it out.
Right.
And in your case, you may have needed like an executive sponsor or someone else who is ready to say, we're going to clean this up.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So I want to switch gears a little bit because you also mentioned succession planning, and I saw that in a lot of what you do. And one of the things as a business professor in college, I just got done a couple weeks back. We went through the 9 grid box and showing them like
Sure.
this is a way that leadership can kind of figure out who's next, who wants to be next, like those kinds of things. I'm wondering when you look at succession planning, whether it's with organizational leaders or just some of the research maybe you've looked at, what are some of the challenges to get people to do this well?
Even what you just did, like working through the 9 grid box,
Mm.
it is a great tool. It is an awesome tool, especially when it's maintained and is helping to drive, provides a framework to drive the next conversation, and you get it operationalized in some way. And then you ask, what's the percentage of businesses that actually use that or some form of it? Many businesses talk about continuity planning and succession planning as if they are separate channels. So you plan continuity, talking about what's the planned obsolescence of our equipment, or when we're going to put a new roof on the building. And you look at this infrastructurally, and that's often in the hands of operations or some kind of task force within the business. Then we move over to the talent side and talk about people, which is usually where we're working with a 9 grid box. That's often under a leadership development group or HR, a strategic HR, something like that. And there's no interface between the two in any strategic way. So, one of the things that really starts to strengthen this and give real heft in the 9 box is when you're tying it to business continuity, because then you're not just saying who can fill the roles as they exist now, but you can tie it to the strategic development of the business, its future balance sheet. You can talk about it for the business that's 20% larger in 3 years. And that then becomes a part of how you fill the box. Now you've got a really strong and robust one. We don't get there because many people feel, many leaders feel, especially if they're not deeply accomplished at this yet, they're a founder, they're maybe still struggling to get things regulated operationally. It feels like a perk. It feels like it's something you do when you've arrived and there's time to do it. There's never time to do it. It's the time that you build in. So when you're taking both a long-term point of view and viewing then secondly the short term in light of the long term, this becomes a regular exercise. So whenever you've got to fill a role, you're doing it with the 9 box in mind, as opposed to we're filling the role, we're filling the role. Now let's have a 9 box exercise when we get around to it. We don't separate them, we don't perforate them. We get a line of sight from here to there, and we're doing one action with 3 or 4 big results on that. And I really enjoy helping organizations set that up where we get a line of sight from here to there. And so we do all the here stuff in light of there. And then the 9 box isn't hard. It doesn't feel like a perk. It feels, why in the world didn't we do this sooner?
Yeah.
Because it speeds up many of the decisions. You already kind of know who's going to step in behind another, who can fill the interim spot if there's a hit by a bus, where cross training has to emerge. You start to paint a portrait of your future business and enterprise. That's really quite fun.
Yeah, and it's like insurance for your business too, to make sure that you're protected when something
Yes.
happens.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and you're already paying for that premium. You don't have to pay more. You don't have to
right.
pay more to do a 9 box. You're actually asking people that are employed to understand it. And this is then one of the objectives that they meet, one of the deliverables that they bring.
So, one of the things that I'm wondering with even thinking about the 9 box as the framework used for succession planning is in my 27 years of corporate, it probably wasn't until the last maybe 10 years when I was higher up in a senior management position that I even was aware that the company used it. And they used it for even their individual contributors, but I was brought into the conversations and my manager started to have conversations of who would I put in the 9 box, like who's going to replace me and where they see me for that next level of leadership. Why do you think, or have you seen in a lot of companies that it is secretive in a way to employees? And why might that be?
Yeah. There's always fear about. political gamesmanship in this stuff, and people that are really feathering their own nests or acting like political animals. It's about loyalty rather than the standards, but a really good, robust system like we're talking about really kind of cuts across a lot of that grain. You're measuring objectives, you're tying it to what does the job require, what kind of person do we have here. And this isn't always about having the next successor already identified and employed. And that's where it starts to get to be a little bit private because you might have two or three names and you're watching to see what emerges. And you don't want to discourage people from growing or to, as much as we like to think everybody acts out of the purest and least selfish of motives, we don't want anybody sandbagging their colleagues either, right? So
Right.
that kind of factors in there. But all of that being said, I think there's a cultural thing that we can address where it becomes secrecy or confidentiality doesn't have to be so deep. So like where we're all walking around like we're on eggshells around this stuff. And that is this. I heard someone say it a couple weeks ago and it just has stayed with me. Whatever your job, who is your replacement? And who can you start mentoring to be your replacement? This person said, what if they say, I've never been mentored? Doesn't matter. Who are you pouring yourself into? If you've been in your job 3 months, who have you identified that you can pour yourself into? Because if you don't, you are making it quite likely you will never be promoted
Yeah.
because you're not creating space, you're not looking forward, you're just simply protecting your territory. And when you go into a protective mode, you make your territory smaller as you go because then it's easier to protect it. But that culture of, hey, you're my new employee, who are you preparing? Who do you have under your wing? No, that's part of your job. And even writing that into the job descriptions to be on the lookout for talent and help it grow, that changes the culture
Oh,
around
yeah.
this.
Yeah. So do you think for succession planning that it's only at certain or levels in the organization, or do you think that it should happen at all levels of the
Yeah,
organization?
I think it should happen at all levels of the organization, and the
Mhm.
sooner the better. It really isn't too late to start unless everything's already begun to fall apart. Now you got to go into a rescue mode. But let's look at it this way. If continuity and succession are wedded together, and I like to say it that succession is a part of continuity planning, then it's all levels of the organization. It's about being able to continue your process and your mission. So what happens if anything breaks? We have an insurance policy if the belt breaks on the sander or something along that line, or we have a maintenance person who fixes it. We got supplies on hand. We need to do that at the people level also because people operate that equipment. So
Right.
if we're going to have good, strong continuity and succession planning, this kind of contingency, or what I like to call multi-scenario planning, is standard fare.
Yeah. And I like what you say about the continuity and the succession planning as part of that. Because I do think, and from my own experience, a lot of people look at, okay, who's going to replace you? Who has the skills that they need? But you absolutely have to look at what's the strategy? What are the big things that we have coming up? And is that still the right person? Or does it take somebody different than maybe who's
Right.
in that role today?
And oftentimes I'm not going to be replaced. So if I've really helped, I'm going back to the leadership piece or someone who's really strong and has grown up a big project around themselves or grown a department around themselves. When they step out, it's often a couple of other people stepping in, dividing out some of what that one person did because it grew up in them and they
Hmm.
know they have all the history and all the relationships. And now you're going to need more capacity as well as capacities. So more capacity to be able to manage the growth if there's growth tied to this. But if I'm stepping out, I'm giving way to what's next, things that I would have been trained for, things that I can't see, couldn't see, I'm not going to live long enough to be a part of. I'm giving way to that. And if I'm leading well, I'm helping to prepare the way for others to step in and keep going, not to run into the same walls I'm running into, right? So it's that. And then again, at that point, I have led instead of just managed what I had under my care.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to I don't think this is a huge pivot, but and it ties into the leadership aspect is the third turn. So I saw this over and over, and then magically, like a half hour before we even jumped on the episode, I found an article that you wrote on LinkedIn because I was thinking to myself even before knowing what are those three big turns, like where do I fall? And then I started to look at your article and I was like, this is magic, just the way that you organize that. So I wanted to see if you could share what does that mean of the third turn and kind of walking through that process and how you see
Sure,
that.
sure. And it's just a few weeks ago that maestrolevelleaders.com. So if you go to that website, maestrolevelleaders.com, there's actually an assessment for these three turns. So a
Okay.
person can actually get an answer to the question you're asking. Where do I land on this? And where do I fit? And this isn't an assessment like you're number three or you're a number one. It's these turns grow into each other. So I'll quickly walk through them. Turn one, you're learning to lead yourself and perhaps lead a project. You're discovering yourself. You're getting self-regulated. This is often the first 10 to 12 years of our career. This is what I can do. This is what I love to do. This is what I'm capable of doing. Maybe I've even hit a couple of limits so that I know that's not where I need to go because I just be frustrated. My employers will be frustrated. Maybe I need a career restart in some kind, but I'm aware of myself in relationship to others. I'm getting some experiences. This is actually where almost it's something the last statistic I saw, something like 86% of all employees will live that have their entire careers.
Okay.
So 100 people join the workforce, 86 of them are going to be frontline workers all of their career. And they're going to have great careers. They're going to get super expert at what they do. And if they really give themselves to it and get artisanally excellent at it, they're going to keep working. Out of that group, like 14 will be invited to lead an organization. They've been trusted by others, or it looks like they might be. Will you lead this organization? Will you take on the P&L and make sure that this business runs? We're going to point you to the C-suite, something like that. Not everyone will succeed at that point, and they'll go back into a first turn life like, oh, now that I've had a taste of it, I don't want it, or I'm somehow churning through, trying again, and things keep falling down around my ears, so I go to another company and try again. But this second turn, you're now leading the organization and leading others. You haven't stopped leading yourself and growing your character, but out of that, you're now leading a whole organization and you're leading places you're not the expert. You're not the best worker. You've got to utilize other people's gifts and you've got to make this thing operationally sound, achieve its strategy. You have to cultivate trust in the organization. The culture has to be strong, or you're not going to be able to do this over time. One of the studies I was looking at, goes back about 6 years now, but it was saying of those who are in a second turn leadership role, only out of 100, only about 14 will be able to move into a third turn.
Okay.
This is not, okay, here's a mediocre leader and here's an excellent leader. We're talking about here's a leader that through hell and high water has lived long in their role. The business has grown underneath their behest. So someone like a Tim Cook with Apple who's just named a successor, and now you're moving into a third turn where you're focused on what the future value is. No longer just the running of the business as it currently is. You're thinking, how do we take it from here? Because we can't earn, do, accomplish what we have doing the same thing. And Apple, since I use that as an example, is a great one. So you go from the little tiny computer to the AirPods and now to the phone. Then what? We don't know yet. Now, under Tim
Right.
Cook, a lot of future value was achieved, but a successor has to figure out what's the future value from here. And a lot of that comes to how the handoff is done, what the vision is that's already in place, how well Apple is capitalized for the future, and where they want to take it. And it could all fall down. It could be like a BlackBerry, or it could go on and get to new heights. That all remains to be seen. But that process of handing it off, getting out of the way, slingshotting a successor, going to the life that you want to go to without messing up what's behind you, that's third turn. And in this assessment, it's just asking some questions where an individual can do this, or even a team can do it to say, where are we collectively and together as a senior team, for
Mhm.
instance. And it just invites you to reflect and think and have conversations around where you see yourself on that journey. We will all have birthdays, we will all live through a season, and if we don't allow the growth to happen in each of these, we will languish and we will not achieve what we could. So maybe I could just say one more thing about this. In the
Mhm.
first turn, you're learning to lead yourself. Second turn, you're learning to lead others and the organization. And in the third turn, you're learning to lead toward future value. This means the learning posture has to be struck all throughout life. We never arrive at a spot where we can say, I know what to do because I saw it before, or this is what I did over there. We might be able to adapt some things and bring it forward, but we have to stay in a learning modality or we're not going to see the opportunities in front of us.
Yeah. So, staying in that learning modality and thinking about how technology has grown over time, how do you think people can stay human despite all this tech as they move
Uh-huh.
forward?
I knew you're going to bring the tech into this in some way. I just yesterday had opportunity to talk about this a little bit with some longtime colleagues and former clients. We had a little bit of a book launch around this book that just came out called The Maestro Effect, and it was great fun. I had an opportunity just to bring a few comments, and we talked about this a little bit. So I'll just go through this little riff that I entered the workforce where the labor economy was still pretty strong. You saw the United Auto Workers starting to move into decline, and you start seeing a lot of things start to move to offshoring. And you've got this voice of senior statesmen like a Peter Drucker saying we're moving into a knowledge economy where these Gen Xers who are just now starting to enter the workforce are going to be subject matter experts and they will be able to take what they know, not just what their physical body can do, but what they know, and they'll be able to be their own champion and take that from place to place. So we better take good care of these knowledge workers or we're going to lose our IP when they go if we don't take good care of them. That only really lasted a couple of decades before we got into an information economy where what we know is codified, filed, and increasingly we're actually paying subscription prices to cloud computing in order to retrieve what we know and filed there. So our knowledge is getting disintermediated. Add AI onto this, where it's now sucking it all into one place and it becomes largely available to anyone once it's there and once it's contained in some way. It's further disintermediated, it becomes free for everybody. And I'm not complaining about it, I'm describing these
Mhm.
changes. So I was paid for what I could do with my body. I started out mowing lawns, slinging hamburgers. That's labor. Now I move into, hey, I know things about group process and how to facilitate difficult decisions, but anybody can look it up now. So, what's the economy from here for humans? Where I have a couple of grandsons that they will always have AI companions, always, forever.
Yeah.
So, what does that look like? And I've become convinced that those who are talking about a relationship economy or a networked economy, I increasingly want to call it a wisdom economy, the ability to see how things can be done across domains, across disciplines, to be able to do complex thinking, to generate and create with others, maybe with tech assistance, but where you're out on that edge where you don't know and they don't know and I don't know, but we work together to make something happen and to bring good to the world. That's the future for us because we're pushing a rock uphill to try and recover things completely as they were before. I write, and one of the great examples, I was doing it today. I'm writing with a pencil, and a pencil is technology. I don't have to take a hammer and a stylus and pound into rock to write
Right.
anymore. This
Yeah.
has stuck. And I wear glasses so that I can see you instead of you being a blurry outline. That's a technology that has stuck. There's going to be something about AI that sticks, and it's going to fundamentally alter how we work. And I was just trying to follow the dynamics and looking ahead. The one thing that's not going away anytime soon is our ability to create, bring love to the room, to be emotionally intelligent, to look forward and say, what if? And I would like to be a part of helping to cultivate that in others as well as myself.
Yeah. And I feel like that's a theme I'm hearing over and over again is it is that emotional intelligence. It is that ability to build those relationships. And I feel like people are craving them even more and more with the advance of technology. And like you said, it's
Mhm.
not anything, AI really isn't anything new. We've had the internet come around. We've had calculators come around, and people
Mhm.
worry about how is this going to change cell phones, different things like that. It's really just another thing. But it has been really a cool thing to see people wanting to be more in community and wanting to be
Mhm.
more working with other people.
Yeah. And if we can admit that and embrace
Mhm.
it, yearn for it, start moving that direction, we're then going to find that we've let some skills decline societally. So we're not very good at arguing our point anymore without getting angry inappropriately.
Yeah.
And to even do that well, we have to demonstrate that we're listening, which means we have to have powers of concentration. We have to be able to have focus and attentiveness and not be distracted. So there's work we have to do, muscles we have to redevelop to be able to do that. And that being said, then the consultants that are out there that have already moved into this space and aren't just being subject matter experts anymore, but are bringing kindness and compassion and deep focus to listen and bringing and hired for their ability to pay attention, to help draw things together and to keep drawing the attention of a group together. They're the ones who I think are going to help us reclaim some of these skills.
And I would say it's interesting from the perspective of working with kids in college or students in
Mm,
college and the skills that they had not had before and trying to figure out how do you integrate those? How do you teach them those skills so that they are better prepared for the workforce? It's
yeah.
definitely been interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I was just reading yesterday about Princeton needing to change its honor code a little bit because they used to take your test and say I didn't have any help or assistance and I didn't cheat, and you still sign that, but it would the preponderance of AI assisted writing where people didn't know their subject was so high they've actually had to go back and revisit that. That's the pool you're swimming in,
Yep.
and it doesn't mean there are no opportunities in it. It just means that's the challenge, and how are we going to go after it in a way that brings good?
Yes. Yes, definitely. This has been an awesome conversation, Mark.
Thank you.
Wanted to see, I think we could talk for a lot longer, continue to go on and on. Wanted to see, is there something that maybe we didn't cover that you wanted to touch on before we start to close out?
There's one thing I always love to talk about that we didn't really focus on here, so I'll just touch on it briefly. A non-anxious presence underlies many of the things that we're talking about. I'm not I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to be unsafe. I don't have to be angry. It doesn't have to be driving me. I can start from I am whole, I am well. And if there's something that prevents that, I can work to deal with that and then not bring it into a room where there is work to do together. I have found that a non-anxious presence and the work that it takes to be such, because you can't just fake your way with this, but to be a non-anxious presence when there are important things to work at helps me, if I'm facilitating or leading or guiding, face the room, perceive what's going on with people, help create safety that spreads from me to others. And so much more happens effectively, efficiently, productively, line of sight from here to there, movement, the ability for people to say, I enjoyed that meeting. The
Mhm.
root for it is down here at that non-anxious presence. So whatever you can do, I can do, anybody listening to this can do to cultivate that in themselves is going to be rewarded many times over. And I love talking with people about how they do it. Someone reaches out and says, I'd like to talk about how I get there or how I'm working at, I'd love to be a
Yeah.
part of a conversation with them about that.
Yeah, that would be great. And that is such a skill, especially thinking about just from my time in a corporate setting, probably more so than the academic setting I'm in now, but how much anxiety, how much stress, how much there's a different kind of pressure. And for people to be able to do that, it does
Hmm.
take work. And it's a great investment in themselves to be able
Yeah, it
to build that. Yeah.
really
Yeah.
is.
Appreciate that. So, Mark, if individuals do want to contact you, whether to have that discussion with you or to learn more, where do you recommend that they go?
Yeah. We put together a little website that just goes by this little URL, marklvincent.com. And it's a gateway to the subjects that interest me, or some of my writing, some of the resources that we make available, and a place where people can say, hey, this would be helpful to me, and then we can begin a conversation.
And is your assessment on that site as well that people
Yes,
can
yeah,
link
we
to?
just got that
Okay.
loaded up there as well. So there's a link to that the three turns assessment there too. Yeah,
Okay. Awesome. Thank you again, Mark. I really appreciate the time with you
my
and
pleasure.
super excited for everyone to listen to this episode.
Thank you.